If you've found yourself in the enviable position of playing as England in the board game Diplomacy, then you most certainly need to know the best openings, alliance structures, strategies, and creative ways to play this naval powerhouse. Today, we're honored to have the founder of the Diplomacy Briefing with us to help us learn to dominate with England. This is Legendary Tactics. Umbletheheep has been tearing up the tournament scene in 8 games as England in the last 2 years. He soloed one of those and topped 6 of them. He was last year's Nexus Cold War Champion, and most recently had a strong finish at the DBNI's invitational top board. He's getting a real reputation for how he plays England. Today, we're going to get an inside look at how he's been so successful. Thanks for joining us today, Umble.
Thank you, Flash.
So let's begin. Why don't we talk first about the upside of England? England is actually my first choice of all the nations in this game, if I have a choice, because they can have real influence in the north with their strong naval presence. They have some flexibility on who to ally with, and they're not entirely surrounded by other powers. So what else would you say makes England a real force in this game, or what makes an English player successful?
Well, I think everything has to begin first off with the player. And so to play any country well, I think it requires the ability to be able to analyze the board and what's happening, and also be able to decisively take that information and then use it. Sometimes you do have to sit back, and as England, you can do that. But generally speaking, you have to be able to see the opportunities and act. The other great thing, though, about England is it's one of those powers that if you like to be able to talk with a lot of people, and if you like to put together grand stabs or kind of a sneaky little side alliances going on, you can do that very easily as England. And it just allows you to really, in a lot of ways, kind of be the string puller of the game from that corner. So you've got to be very good at forming alliances, and also very good at breaking apart alliances if you're going to consistently dominate as England.
Excellent. So with every upside, though, there of course come downsides. So what challenges do you think an English player faces, and what can you do to overcome them?
Many people think that the fact that England is an island, that means naturally that it has to be incredibly defensible. But strong players can take England down very quickly with good coordination. And so it's not quite as defensible as it looks. And also the fact that it is an island, that means it takes a lot longer to mobilize your forces, particularly armies. In a real way, England only begins with 2 usable units. So whereas everybody else can kind of use their units in different ways, you only really have 2. And so in a lot of ways, your gameplay is dictated on your ability to do diplomacy, especially in those first 2 years. So you don't quite have the power projection. And that's one reason why oftentimes England's not that strong as a gunboat player, because you have to be able to have good diplomacy to be able to play England well.
Actually, speaking of defense for England, I have a trivia question for you. According to Trivial Pursuit, which is the most defensible nation in diplomacy?
Yes, I'm familiar with this question. And whoever put this into Trivia Pursuit, I don't think had played a lot of diplomacy. They say it's England, but most players nowadays would say that if you're wanting to make it into the mid game, Italy is probably your power of choice. And I would say even Turkey's more defensible than England if you're having 3 people attack you.
I would agree with you. Yeah, there's nothing worse than a turtling turkey. By the way, just before we get into openings, if the person watching this video has stabbed someone in diplomacy, please put that talent to work right now by stabbing the subscribe button so you don't miss any of our other diplomacy strategy guides. But let's talk openings. So the most basic question is whether you go to the English channel or not. And I put this question out to our viewers. I'll put that on screen now this week. And I was really surprised to find that the number of players who opt to move to the channel is roughly equal to the number of players who prefer a more traditional opening. What are your thoughts on opening to the English channel?
Well, one of the first things that you'd have to consider on that is the reasons why you would move to the channel. And so for some players, the reason they would go there would be, one, they want to put immediate pressure on France. Now, one of the things I think it's always really important when you're thinking about openings is to understand that what we're talking about today is how to play England well in a diplomacy setting. So I would say if you're a gunboat player, going to the channel as your normal go-to move is what you should do, particularly because of the strength France has. I think sometimes players will take that same mentality and apply it straight into diplomacy in an actual negotiation sense. And so as England, you would want to move to the channel if you want to put that pressure on France, not so much even that you don't want to to attack him, but maybe you want to try to influence that fleet build that could come in 1902 from Brest. So sometimes people will go there to try to make France guess, and maybe they move to Brest themselves and then they can't build there in 1902, or maybe you just take it. Another reason people like going to the channel is because then you can also influence Belgium. And so you could maybe convoy over into Belgium, or you could also use your forces to maybe support someone into Belgium. So that's another reason. I think it also shows Germany that you're very much committed in wanting to go against France. And so perhaps you build maybe a better relationship right from the get-go by being aggressive. And all three of these are reasons why some players really, really like to go to the channel. And I also think that for some, there's a natural tendency to want to go there anyway because they're a little more aggressive, and it kind of makes them feel like they're in a more dominant position by being in the channel right away.
It takes a brave player. I noticed at the DBNI's game that you had an England go to the channel, and you had to decide whether to block that in Brest or not, and you chose not to. You decided correctly there. So that must take some nerves to not protect your home center like that.
Well, the general truth I find for diplomacy is people like to move, and on blocking and not covering stuff, I find it's different for different levels. Like a lot of times in a beginner level, they're going to go for the open center every single time. Right. And then the next stage, they go for the position. And then when you get kind of to the next place where you're playing with some really advanced players, it can feel a little more like a 50-50, because sometimes they'll just do the center thinking you're going to try to go for the tactics. So it can be a little nerve wracking, but in that particular situation from that game, there was a lot of contingency things going on that I felt I'd still be okay, even if you went for it.
Very good. So does the downside of going to the channel outweigh the upside then in your mind?
In my opinion, yes. The first reason is because if you're going to do consistently well with England, you need to be very flexible in the options that you have. You need to be able to find where your growth is going to happen. And so while moving to the channel does give does help perhaps with Germany saying, oh, look, England really wants to work with me. The other side of that is you also are giving all the power over to Germany and what's going to happen in the West. You've made France uneasy by moving there. You yourself don't really have any power now on who's going to come out. And a lot of Germany's like to kill England first. And so when you just move to the channel yourself, you're actually maybe just signing your own death warrant by doing that. And I think another reason is a lot of people look at France as this possible power to play against if you're any of the other countries, and it has to be eliminated. But that's just really not true. England can control so much of the game in a lot of different ways. Another principle I think it's really important is you don't always have to attack the board leader yourself. You just have to make sure someone else does. And that's the key. And so with France, you can have a very good relationship, but if you lie to him and move to the channel, especially, you are limiting your options. The English-French relationship has seen kind of a renaissance a little bit in this time of being a very powerful alliance for England. And we've seen a lot of great board tops that England has gotten with doing EFs. Also, another real concern by moving to the channel is you cannot guarantee that you get a build.
Right.
You can be bounced out and a lot of French players will talk with Russia and make sure Russia goes north, so that if something like that happens, then you get bounced out of everything and you get 0 builds. There might be some other facts I need to find out, because if Russia's going north too, then I definitely don't want to try to bounce them in the channel. I want to try to guarantee my build. I need that build. So that's another reason why I think that's not wise. And then ultimately too, I think you can accomplish a lot of the goals that you have for moving to the channel by just good diplomacy. I think you can get Belgium without moving to the channel. I think you can work on perhaps not getting that fleet build in Brest through diplomacy. And also the other aspect there with moving to the channel is that when you move to the channel, you will never get that surprise attack on France again. And so there's you are limiting your options long term. And so I think, sure, it's good to have that perhaps as an option, but I think if you rely on that, you will not get consistently great results as England.
When would you opt to go to the channel then? It sounds like there's a lot of downsides to it. Are there times where this would be advisable?
Yes. So there's a few things that I would want there to be in place if I was going to move aggressively to the channel. Of course, the first one is that the channel would be open. Like I want to get there. I'm going to put a fleet there. I want it to get in. Also, a strong desire to work with Germany, and the fact that Germany is going to move to Burgundy himself, and that he's going to get in. It's one thing for Germany to ask you to move to the channel, but it's quite another thing where he says, you know what, I've set up with France a DMZ in Burgundy, and I'm going there anyway. And so if you have a Germany that's making a hard commit, go all in. I mean, that sounds like a great plan. The thing you have to watch out for is a lot of Germans want to get England and France fighting early so they can choose who they can get, or that they can go get some other centers and then choose. So a lot of Germans really want to see an early English-French war that they don't even have to participate in.
Yes.
So if you have a German that's coming and saying, hey, you should move to the channel, you should move to the channel, it probably doesn't hurt to double back some with France and say, has Germany asked you to move to the channel? Because a lot of them will do that. They want you both to move there and balance preferably.
That's ideal for them.
Yeah. So I want to make sure that I'm going to get in. I want to make sure that Germany's making a commitment to go into Burgundy and that he will make it in there. Not that it's just some little bounce that they've set up, and that Russia's not moving north. And of course, then too, that I want to work with the German ally, that he seems like someone that's a good long-term person to work with. So all of those things really need to be in place for me to go all in and basically burn all of my diplomatic influence to go against France, because I think you can take France out very quickly with a strong EG, and you don't even have to move to the channel if you know the moves to make.
Very good. Yeah. And we also have to take note, it's not called the French channel, it's called the English channel. So it's almost like an invitation to go there. Yeah. So my favorite and more traditional opening is the northern opening, the Churchill variant, that sees Fleet Edinburgh to the Norwegian Sea, Fleet London to the North Sea, and Army Liverpool to Edinburgh. And I like this opening because you can choose to convoy your army with either of your fleets, so there's some flexibility there. What would you say are the relative advantages and disadvantages of this opening compared to the standard opening with the army going instead to Yorkshire instead of Edinburgh?
Yeah, so the army going over to Yorkshire is basically there so that you can do some defense if France goes to the channel. If you are 100% sure that France isn't going to the channel, then going up to Eddie is the more flexible move. You also may just want to show Russia that you're not keeping that option open, but I would say Eddie's probably the more flexible move, as long as you know that France isn't going to the channel. If not, then you're going to be making your guesses a lot harder if you don't send that army over to Yorkshire.
What are your thoughts on other early goals for England?
Yeah, so as England, the most important goal is you need an ally. That's the most important. There's other countries that can kind of play a slow game and kind of look for their advantages, but England needs to get an ally, or at the very least, you need to get somebody who will not attack you. You want to be able to get Belgium. You preferably would love both of them to support. And it's not so much that army in Belgium that you convoy is going to be the most impactful, but by getting that build, you're able to use it in the different ways that you want to attack. And in some ways, you could look long-term, you're really kind of switching out that army for a fleet to get quicker gains. And then also that army there on the continent can be able to be used against France or Germany to make them fall faster. So you really do want to get two builds out of this. Preferably, you want to have France and Germany make a commitment against each other. The best is when one of them supports you into Belgium and the other doesn't. And that gives you then all the power in the West on how to choose an ally. And you can probably for the next year or so play them off against each other as you continue to expand and get more centers and get a stronger presence. So you would also preferably be able to get Russia bounced out of Sweden. It's harder to get Sweden if Russia is already there. So if Germany will bounce Russia out of Sweden, you have a good opportunity that both of them will support you into Sweden. And that's phenomenal as England. So as an English player, if I can get a German to commit to bounce Russia out of Sweden, I very much will lean towards doing an EG just on that fact, because you're giving England space to actually have some presence too. When it comes to Russia, I usually tell them early on, I say, look, if you don't move north, I won't convoy an army to Norway. I say it's an easy decision there. We can have peace the whole game.
Yes.
So that's how I usually approach it. And I've only ever had one Russia not take me up on that, and it didn't go well for him. And
that's right. Yeah, I've had great success with that tactic too.
Yeah. And you know, Russia doesn't want an early war in the north. What Russia really wants is they want to be able to grab stuff from the north without much effort. So they don't want to have to try to make that commitment. So giving them that option to not do it is very good.
I'm really noticing a common thread here in that you like to negotiate relationships with the other nations. And a lot of this advice is going to depend heavily on the outcomes of your press or your discussions with those people. And so I can see why a writer like yourself would really enjoy playing England, because the writing and the messaging seems so critical. So we have the game moving into 1902 now. I feel like England needs to pick a side. So do you prefer pairing with Germany, France, or even the Western Triple?
Yes. So I like all of them. And I think, I again, my biggest thing is I just want to find somebody that I can work with. I don't really care who it is. Preferably, it's great to have choices, but a lot of it comes down to who do you think you're going to be able to work with long term. And so EGs, EFs, Western Triples, I mean, all of them can work very well for England. So to do a good EG alliance, one of the things that would help me want to go with Germany would be, of course, bouncing Russia out of Sweden, like I'd mentioned, a willingness to not build an extra fleet. I know a lot of German players that like to play aggressive, like to build another fleet in 1902, but that's obviously not great long-term stability for England or for Russia. Either of them see that second fleet. I don't just accept it that that's just what it has to be. I mean, that second fleet is going to be used for something. It's not just defense. I mean, that's your best German players want to use it against you probably at some point. So a German that's willing to make a more equal alliance where you are the fleets and they're the armies is very appealing to me to do an EG. My relationship with Russia is also very important too. How I feel that relationship will be determines a lot. So for instance, if I have a great relationship with Russia, I'm probably more likely to do an EG in that situation, because I know that if that relationship falls apart, I have Russia to pressure Germany. So that may lean me towards that. And on an EF, a big part of that comes down to, you know, supporting me into Belgium, helping me get another build. A French player that's not willing to help me get two builds, who's getting two builds himself, is one that, to me, I don't think is a great long-term partner. And so in those situations, I usually just tell Germany, I'll say, look, if you'll build those two armies, I'll build a fleet in Liverpool, a fleet in London, and let's just go at it and kill them. And it can be a very, very effective alliance in that setup. So I honestly like all of them. And on a Western Triple on that side, generally, of course, England's want to do that. It gives them the ability to kind of sit back a little bit, grab some centers and see what develops. But it's usually wise as England to not ever offer to do a Western Triple. You want them coming to you, because Germany gets the most nervous when those words come up. And so whatever you do, you want them to be the one coming to you about it so that they don't feel threatened. And by the way, sometimes I've got this in two of my games. I've got, before in fall 1901, been able to convoy my army to Denmark, and Germany just take Belgium and Holland, and we kind of separated it out by me getting the north, him getting that, and then we move against France. And that's a great place to be as England. You're not going to get that often, but you can sometimes get a convoy into Denmark with working with Russia. So if you've got a really good relationship with Russia, and you know Germany's going to be bouncing in Sweden, you and Russia can talk together. And instead of him bouncing him in Sweden, he just moves into the Baltic Sea, and you convoy straight over into Denmark. You get your two builds that way. And Germany, you know, won't be able to keep that fleet in Sweden there for long. So you can put some real hurt on Germany early that way with working with Russia. And so those are other options with how to kind of begin to carve out a little bit of a foothold there in the north.
We should probably talk about the relative merits then of these alliances too, if they're both valid options. So let's dive a little deeper into the English-French alliance.
Generally speaking, in the England-French alliance, at least from the English perspective, you prefer that you're going to kind of get the northern part of Germany. Sometimes Holland is given to France, but I think generally as England, you want to get that. You want to get that whole northern half. And you're just going to push against Russia. Oftentimes what happens is you get a little bit from Russia and then you drop and collapse on Germany. That if you're going to take out Germany, the best way to do it is to carve out a little bit from the top of Scandinavia, maybe get Sweden, maybe get a little bit of Denmark, and then drop down. Because I think if you put all your focus into the bottom half, it's going to be slow going. So the easy centers are a little bit up there at the top, and then you can drop and grab from the top there of Germany. So with an EF, what you've got to watch out for, of course, is him backdooring you and coming up from the North Atlantic Ocean and beginning to convoy armies. And that's the big scare for English players with France. And so one of the big things that can help you is if you have an Italian that is putting a little bit of pressure on France. I think as England, there's always kind of like a soft war going on behind the scenes in any alliance that you're in. And particularly with an English-French alliance, you guys are working together against Germany, but there's a little bit of a software going on with France talking with Russia, trying to slow you down probably, right, and you talking with Italy, trying to slow France down a little bit. Now, again, it's not that you guys aren't trying for things to work well, but a lot of times there's little things going on like that because no one wants someone to run away with the game. So with the English-French alliance, you generally want France to have another enemy he's kind of fending off so that you can continue to consolidate your gains. Again, I would say if in that 1902 year, if I see that Italy's putting a little pressure on France, most likely I'm probably going to hit Germany rather than France. As an English player, you really don't want to split up France with Italy because that's just all that is you're giving them some of the centers you should get. And so you don't need Italy to take down France. It might take a little bit longer, but you don't need him to come in and do that. So when Germany comes to me and says, hey, let's work with Italy to take down France, I'll say yes. But most likely what I'm going to do is then just take Germany out and let France kind of, wallow away with that while I get my centers. So you're going to do that. You're going to also, if you're trying to solo here off of an EF alliance, then you're probably going to want to take Moscow and Warsaw. And so that means that you have been building armies, convoying armies over. And right about that time when you're taking Warsaw and Moscow, you're going to want to collapse on France. So that's Munich, that's taking Holland, that's moving into the North Atlantic, into the English Channel. And you're going to try to push south and get that next 4 centers that you're going to need to completely solo the game. And that's the way to a solo on the EF alliance. You also, I think another thing too there that it's important to remember is that in any of these alliances, if you're going to solo, the armies are the pathway to solo. You, as England, your fleets can only do so much and you've got to be pumping armies out. So I would generally say that as England, you probably at max don't need more than 5, maybe at times 6 fleets, but you need to be putting out a ton of armies, getting them onto the continent as fast as you can.
And so timing is really critical with England to decide when you're going to go for that solo and when you're going to stab France. Some players might find themselves better matched with Germany. If that's the case, how do your tactics and strategies change?
Yeah, Germany is definitely, I would say, the easiest way to get to a solo. France is tougher to solo on, but I would say that France is a faster way to get to a board top. You can grow faster just grabbing the north of Germany than grinding it out against France. But if you're looking for the easiest, fastest way to a solo, probably the EG Alliance. And so many people prefer it because of that. But by the way, it's a very valid alliance. It's a great alliance. So for an EG alliance, like I mentioned, I find that Germany being willing to make a commitment that they'll be the armies and you be the fleets is really important for that to work. If he's wanting to kind of be an equal player in that, that doesn't bode great long-term for your guys' relationship. But for an EG, generally, if you're trying to solo or top the board out of an EG, what you're wanting to be able to do is you get builds from France before Germany does. And so bouncing, again, getting him to bounce Russia and make that commitment is very important. Hopefully then you get Sweden. In fact, a lot of times what I do, if I'm doing an EG like this, I'll tell Russia, support my fleet from Norway into Sweden and we'll be friends the rest of the game. I won't put any pressure on St. Petersburg. I go, you're not getting Sweden anyway, so why not support me in? And then both of us can kind of just hold the line against Germany while me and him move south. So if you're doing an EG, hopefully you're getting that build. But then also, I'd say if you're doing an EG, you need to commit against France. If you're going to kill France, it is not going to happen because you're 50-50 waffling back and forth. You've got to build the fleets. You've got to plug North Atlantic. You've got to plug Irish Sea. You've got to plug the English Channel, and you've got to force the Mid-Atlantic. There's just no way around that. And so build those, get hopefully another fleet build too from Sweden so that you don't have to commit that North Sea fleet either, and force the Mid-Atlantic. And the goal here in an EG is that you want to begin getting builds before Germany gets builds in Paris or Marseille. So I would generally say the best thing to do is come down into the Mid-Atlantic, and then probably the next thing is maybe get into the Western Mediterranean and then support yourself back into Spain. Start grabbing builds this way. And if you can start building first, what's going to happen is then you're going to have this option to either maybe you move against Germany in that second stage, or you move on against Italy and secure some of these centers you'll need for a solo. At the end of the day, if you're trying to solo, you got to stab Germany. There's no way around that. So if that's your goal, and if you've got that opportunity, the best way probably to do that is get Tunis and then make your collapsing move on Germany to grind out those last centers that you need for a solo. Because if you can get yourself up to the stalemate line and you've got Tunis, the solo is just a matter of time. You'll get St. Petersburg no matter what, if you've got that position. So EGs are much easier, I would say, to solo than EFs, but they're also slower too initially than EFs. But they're a great alliance.
So this brings us to the prospect of a Western triple with France, Germany, and England all working together. Do you ever go for this?
As England, I've never been asked to do a Western triple. I would. On the outside, I would reluctantly agree, but on the inside, I'd be having a little party. Right. So Western triples for England are great because, first of all, it immediately makes you very safe. France is going to be committing his fleets to attack Italy. Germany is going to be focusing his forces against Russia. And it's not necessarily that you have to stab or anything. You can go and grab some of your northern centers and then, of course, make a decision. The decision that comes out of it may be that you actually end up allying with two countries from the east, and then you all split everybody there in the center. So as England, if someone does a Western triple and there's some seriousness there, you are probably going to make it to the end of the game. No problem.
So there's unfortunately going to be times in any diplomacy game where none of these options works out for you, and you find yourself against a united Germany and France, so and possibly even Russia in the mix. So what defensive options do you suggest in that case?
Right. So anytime that three people attack you, if they stay committed and they have just a average amount of tactical ability, they will win. No power is strong enough, no matter how good you are tactically, to win. So the key in all of that, first off, is that you split them up. And when you have multiple people attacking you, you want people to feel like they're not getting the fair shake of a stick in this attack. So for instance, if France and Germany are attacking, you want, let's say, France to feel like they're doing the work, but Germany's the one getting the centers, and generally I would say it's usually wise, if you're getting attacked by an FG or even also Russia included, that Germany is the one that gets the centers, because they are a lot easier to stab than France is or than Russia is in that case. So if Germany's kind of getting an extra one or two, there's going to be some more envy going on between the neighbors, and they may just move, and all of a sudden you'll get that space. But I would say you want to focus your defense so that nobody's going to get anything quick. And if anybody's going to get anything, it's going to be one person. And so then you can just keep harping on the fact that you're putting all this work and you're not going to get anything. And here's an easy way you can get it. Just turn on your ally. So generally, I would say that's the approach to take. But the best thing is just not to get in that situation. Like, you want people to see that it's better for them to work with you than to work with them. And again, that's where Belgium's really important. So for instance, if you have France and Germany coming against you, probably what's happened is they've worked something out that either one of them is getting Belgium or nobody's getting Belgium. And they're just doing a bounce. And so if you can figure that out, and I would say just support one of them in.
Right. Yes.
Right. Just support one of them in. And then when, the person that didn't get in comes upset, just tell them, say, look, if Germany comes to you, just say, well, France told me if I don't support him, then he won't work with me against you or something. And
that's right. Yeah. It's so easy to disguise things. Even if you're not allies with someone, you can make it look as if you are.
Right. Well, or if you do a good attack, like, here's the other thing I found. Like, a lot of times you have two people attacking you, and one of the persons that's attacking you doesn't want the other person to build. And so you can just go to them and say, look, the 50-50 guess that's happening here. You don't want them to build. I know that. So what's happening? Just tell me. And I've had that happen plenty of times. Brilliant. Okay, make this move. And so it doesn't become a 50-50. You're using people's own self-interest against the alliance. Yes. And, and here's the great thing. If you can slow them down, even if perhaps you don't win, usually you take them both down with you. So at the end of the day, you get at least a little satisfaction that the people that attacked you didn't board top off of that.
Remind me, if I ever play against you as England, to run for the hills as quickly as I can. But after alliances are settling into place, what do you think an English player should be looking for on the board, and what other mid-game and end-game considerations can you offer?
So again, if you're going to play well with England, you've got to be looking at where your opportunities are, but also you need to be looking at what's happening in the East, because you want the East to stay balanced. So for instance, you may have set yourself up to that France is the one that you want to move on, but then you look and see Russia's getting a more powerful position, and you might just say, you know what, I'm not going to mess against France. I'm just going to go against Russia because he's actually the real person that is going to be competing against me for the board top. So you've got to keep an eye on what's happening in the East, because you can balance and imbalance the East very easily by your relationship that you have with Russia. So that's very important. You need to keep in mind stalemate lines. As England, you have the ability to stalemate people from getting out of the Mediterranean. You have the ability to stop any type of northern incursion also. And also, if you've got a presence there in the north, you can also be kind of that last force that solidifies that Munich and Berlin stalemate line there too. So as an English player, if you want to play well in the end game, you need to know those stalemate lines like the back of your hand. You need to be able just to drop the pieces out on the board and be able to set everything up and and in your mind, you need to think, how many moves does it take me to stalemate this? If I need to do it, this is what I have to do, because you'll find that in plenty of those end games, just the threat of you being able to say, I can do this, will give you options, and will give you influence on what happens in the game.
So what do we do about Turkey then? I picture them as a bit of a mirror image corner power. And how can you work meaningfully with them if they're on the far side of the map without much relevance to you for quite some time? Do you ever reach out to them? And if so, what do you talk about?
Yeah, of course, you want Turkey to do well, but not too well, right? You want Turkey not to be eliminated quickly, because that means that Russia and probably Italy are going to be able to move more towards you. So you want to be in, I would say, good dialogue, especially sharing information about what's happening with Russia. You want to be able to, sometimes it's good just to have somebody that is not trying to get you defeated, and you can just, bounce ideas off tactically. But information's really the big thing. And Turkey makes, in many ways, a great mid-game or even end-game alliance. If you're trying to get this to a three-way draw, Turkey is a very easy one to work with as England. So whether they're coming out with Austria or even really with Russia, you can work some things out very nicely with both being corner powers.
What would you say is the most devastating way possible to counter England? If I came up against you in a game, what do I need to do to beat you?
Well, the best way to beat me is to be my friend, and
and help you and give you centers.
right.
Yes.
Right. The best way I would say to stop England is to have a strong Russia. If there is a strong Russia that's got a strong northern presence, most likely that means other people are going to be having opportunities to grow that England will not be able to counter. So most likely, if you've got a strong Russia, France is probably stronger than England in that board situation. So I would say that's probably what you want. Of course, though, when you build a strong Russia, you're creating a lot of other problems too. So the best thing if you're with England is not to attack me, but to be my friend and let's work together.
Yeah, that sounds really fair. So you were actually the one who discovered my channel. You found some of my early content, and it sounds as if you're really good at identifying threats and making strong assessments of those threats. And so you've got The Briefing, which is a weekly threat assessment in the diplomacy community. Fantastic publication. Lots of work goes into it, lots of thought, and it's really wonderful. I'd encourage people to go check it out. But I wonder if you could tell everybody how we can stay connected with the diplomacy community, and if you could direct us to The Briefing now.
Sure. The Diplomacy Briefing mission is to connect the diplomacy community together. And so we do that by letting everybody know what's happening across the community. So whether it's the virtual scene, face-to-face tournaments, extended deadline tournaments, we keep a running calendar of what's coming up. We announce results. We put up new variants, anything interesting that comes out in the diplomacy community. We try to highlight that in The Briefing. It comes out every Friday, and it's free. You can go to diplomacybriefing.com to sign up for that. And we have a great team that works on that. Matthew, John, and also Dave are great editors that they prepare the issues. And so I appreciate what they're doing, and I appreciate the support that the community has, and how we've really just come together to help grow the community at large. But The Briefing, I like to think, has been a real force for good in the community, and love to have you subscribe if you want to be a part.
Wonderful. Yeah. Great way for new players, especially, to get involved with what's going on. So you also do a podcast too?
Yes. So Go Horns Go and myself mix in there some of our diplomacy thoughts. So
it really feels as if for England, understanding the alliance structures and how to leverage them is one of the central ways of doing well as England. Are there any other final thoughts you can offer to players to improve their game?
You need to be able to analyze what's going on and then act. Sitting back and hoping that things work out for you in diplomacy seldom happens, just as they do in the real world. If you want to do well in the game, you have to be able to be decisive about that. So that's very, very important as England, because you don't have the same type of force that perhaps some of the other countries would have. So you've got to be decisive. Understand the importance too, by the way, of the North Sea. The North Sea borders more supply centers than any other space. And if you give up the North Sea, the time that you will be having in that diplomacy game will probably be pretty brief. So don't give that up. And also always try to have options. So if you feel like you have less options, try to create new ones. Try to reform new alliances, or at least the possibility of it. You need to have lots of options if you're going to be able to play well consistently.
It's been very helpful to have you lay out a thorough plan for England. I hope that new and experienced players alike out there have learned something today. If you've gotten value out of this video, please consider sharing it with your fellow diplomacy players. Thanks so much for joining us today, Umble.
Thank you.
If you'd like to help our channel, stabbing that like button feeds the famed YouTube algorithm. To create the next video in this series, I need you to help me get this video up to 150 likes. As ever, I really appreciate the time you spent watching this video. Check out our other videos on the other nations of diplomacy for more world-class ideas like these.